Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Barakah Blueprint. This is the podcast where we talk about how balance of faith and focus can lead us to truly lasting success. My name is Ibrahim Sharif, and today's episode is a very special one. Why? Because Ramadan is right around the corner. By the day this is released, Ramadan would be in 1 or 2 days. And all of us those of you that are Muslims and listening to this podcast, we would be fasting. And beside fasting, we will want to try and make the most out of this Ramadan, especially this Ramadan, unlike the past Ramadans that we have experienced. And if you want to make the most out of Ramadan, now is the time to prepare. Assuming that you're one of those that listen to Barakah Blueprint when it is released, you would have the unique opportunity to listen to these tips and the advice that I'm about to share with you before Ramadan begins. And going through change, going through positive change, going through lasting change and a lasting impact is something that requires self-discipline. But here's the thing, self-discipline doesn't start from the day you fast. Self-discipline is something that starts right now. Right now, as in if you're listening to this before Ramadan, during Ramadan, after Ramadan, it doesn't matter. Self-discipline needs to start the moment you realize that you're lacking and the moment you realize that you are not on top of the horse. So today, we'll be talking about how self-discipline leads us to barakah. And not just in Ramadan, in every single aspect of our lives. So let's get into this episode in Barakah style. Okay, folks, firstly, what is true self-discipline? Most people think that self-discipline is when you push yourself through situations that you don't like or challenges that you don't like. Push through even if you don't like it, even if it doesn't feel comfortable, you just push through. That is what they think self-discipline means. Now, part of that is correct because discipline is about building habits that lasts you through hard times and difficult times. Meaning that even when times get difficult, you will still adhere to the habits that you built because they are a natural part of your day or a natural part of your time. That's why, to you, my dear Muslim listener, you may have heard our colleagues, friends, companions, those around us that don't really or haven't gone through Ramadan or haven't fasted, they usually say, not even water. Usually that is something that comes up, right? And for us, we don't really feel the absolute hardship or difficulty even when we fasted in the summers. Now, it wasn't something that was difficult per se. It was challenging, yes, but it wasn't something to complain about. Why? Because we have spent such a long time building that habit. One of the things that we are taught in Ramadan is that, okay, let's keep it very simple. We don't eat or drink even when we're hungry or thirsty. Now, the reason why this is not difficult is because this is a habit that we set for a long period of time. It's also not specifically about the time that it takes to set up a habit. It's also about the purpose. For example, we are strongly convinced by our faith. So, setting up a habit of fasting a particular period of time during the year is a habit that we set up purely out of faith and conviction. That in itself will make the habit or the actions that the habit entails or leads us to not so difficult and not so challenging to the point that we feel like we want to give up. Okay, now why am I saying all of this to you? The reason why is because self-discipline or true self-discipline is about, number one, having a clear vision on your purpose, your why. Why do you want to set up a particular habit, or what do you want to achieve and why do you want to achieve it? And also about understanding and respecting the process. You need to understand that setting up particular habits takes time. Like those of you that are listening to Barakah Blueprint, I can assume that not all of you are born Muslims. Those of you that are Muslims, some of you are converts, some of you are Muslims from birth, but you started to practice the religion later on in life, let's say in your adult years or in your late teens, for example. Now, even for you, if you haven't been brought up in a practicing culture or in a practicing environment, of course, there are going to be certain situations, for example, fasting in Ramadan, where the initial month or two, they could be more challenging than the rest. But you realize slowly but surely that on the third Ramadan or the fifth Ramadan, it's a natural part of our day. It's a natural part of our year. Why? Because you have taken the time to go through a change. You have taken the time to understand why you are going through the change and why you're enduring this month of, or this period of time where you don't eat or drink or avoid other negative habits. And the reason why you eventually succeed, my dear listener, is because you have taken the first step of changing something within yourself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change the condition of a people lest they change the condition within themselves. So building self-discipline requires the first step of understanding what is the purpose of the change, what is the purpose of what I want to achieve. And secondly, about internalizing that change and starting with yourself. Starting by changing your mindset, for example, is the first thing before you start to implement particular habits or follow particular actions. So speaking of the purpose, why do we fast? Why do we go through what we go through in Ramadan? No, it's not to feel what it is to be poor or what it is like to be poor. It's not about reconciling with less water and food. None of that. It's nothing material. It's nothing physically contingent per se. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the second chapter of the Quran, Surah Baqarah chapter number 2, part number 3, fasting is prescribed to you as it was prescribed previous nations so that you may increase in God consciousness, so that you may attain taqwa. So it's about aligning your person, yourself, with this ideal, which is God consciousness. Meaning that all of our actions, all of our habits need to have a clear direction towards this picture that is called God consciousness. What does it mean? During the month of Ramadan, you increase in reciting Quran, aligning yourself with other spiritual activities such as increasing in adhkar and godly remembrances, divine remembrances. Maybe outside of Ramadan you're not so good with your prayers, and during Ramadan you better yourself with that. Or let's say you engage in or indulge in harmful activities that during Ramadan you put a stop to, or you slow down at least for a little bit. If you were to fast, or if you were to go through Ramadan without the purpose of God consciousness and purely with the purpose of ticking a box, those changes that you go through in Ramadan will purely be temporary. Now, why am I saying this? Because if the purpose is God consciousness, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards what we intend. Why? Because we mentioned several episodes, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Every action is preceded by the intention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards righteous and pure intentions. So what I'm saying with this is the following. If the purpose and the intention of your fasting is God consciousness, then those habits that you build and the results that you achieve won't be purely temporary. They will be changes that truly last. I'll take the example of the Prophet ﷺ. He was the example to follow in self-discipline. He was the example to follow in everything, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says several instances in the Quran, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, in the Messenger of God, we left you with a perfect example, or a great example. He built strong habits that he not only followed during the month of Ramadan, but those were habits that were consistent all along. For example, the habit of prayers in the night, the habit of constant recitation of Quran, the habit of constant and frequent remembrance of God. While he increased of that much more in Ramadan, yes, but those habits stayed with him throughout the entirety of the year. For example, even after the obligation of the night prayer was lifted, because it used to be an obligation on the Muslims before, the Prophet ﷺ would still wake up for tahajjud, the nightly prayer right before Fajr, which is approximated as the last third of the night. Before the prayer of dawn or Fajr. Because the Prophet ﷺ relied on a system. Fasting doesn't just teach patience, it trains your mind. It trains your mind to control desire and distractions. You train your mind to say no to desires and other harmful things. And what's interesting with that is that studies today show us that fasting or abstaining from food and drink for a certain period of time will help boost clarity and focus. Like, think of it this way. How come, specifically during Ramadan, we find it much easier to hyper focus on our prayer, salah, our Quran recitation, our adhkar, and basically we have it easier to focus on our spiritual self? Of course, beside the fact that Ramadan is a month of barakah, hence we discuss it in the Barakah Blueprint, but also because we are at a pure state, or as pure of a state as we could get. And therefore, my dear listener, barakah is not only about having more time. It's about using that time wisely. For example, when fasting, you don't find yourself inclined to indulge in useless talk. Well, I mean, it could be because we're hungry and somewhat energy deprived to a certain state, or like indulging in bad talk or indulging in bad habits, because we put ourselves in a mindset that commands discipline and commands focus. So the question that we need to pose to ourselves is, what could we possibly achieve if we hold that mindset throughout the year and beyond Ramadan? And that, my dear listener, is a golden chance for us. This is the chance and this is the moment where we can truly transform our lives if we focus on the right priorities this Ramadan. So let's train ourselves. Let's try our absolute best to wake up early and already prepare ourselves for what is to come. And trust me, both the body and the soul will thank you in Ramadan, because Ramadan means suhoor and tahajjud. It means an early meal before dawn and late night prayers, because we want to maximize the reward, we want to maximize the spiritual benefits. So, if you're listening to this and you have the luxury of spending a day before Ramadan, because this episode is coming out on Friday, and this episode is already going to be released in the morning, so there is a chance that the day you're listening to this episode, we're going to be praying tahajjud. Not tahajjud, sorry. We're going to be praying tarawih. Okay, there is a chance. All right. So in that case, maybe when I'm telling you to try to wake up a bit earlier, I think that's going to be something you're going to be forced to do. Because it will be suhoor time already, because we'll already be in Ramadan. But if it is the case that we have a day's buffer between this episode and Ramadan, try to wake up early the next day. Like 15 minutes, 30 minutes earlier, if you can. I'm saying that, and I need to follow this myself because I'm recording this and posting this after some time. I'm going on a spiral. I'm bringing you with me on the spiral. That's good. So you know what? Let's continue and talk about habits that we should be forming in Ramadan. Let's put it that way instead. Ramadan is the month of Quran. You're going to see a special series also regarding Quran in my YouTube channel and on my other social media platforms. It won't be released on Spotify. I haven't thought about doing that yet, but for the moment it will be on YouTube and my other socials, where I'll be purely talking about the Quran and introducing the Quran on a deeper level to you, my dear listeners. And why? Because Ramadan is the month of Quran. So the habit that you need to build, my dear listener, something that you need to have with you after Ramadan, is to recite the Quran daily. You need to. It's a must. It's a non-negotiable. So already now, start with a daily recitation. Whatever you can do. If it's only 5 verses or 3 or whatever, do that. There's no too little. It can only be better, of course, but you need to start already. As long as you're consistent. Doesn't matter how little, doesn't matter how much. Let's also take Ramadan as a digital detox and not only a physical and spiritual detox. Let's start already by decreasing the screen time and the time we spend on social media. Unless you're watching Barakah Blueprint. No, I'm joking. But seriously, no. Do not prioritize Barakah Blueprint during Ramadan, of course. Because, ladies and gentlemen, in Ramadan, your phone should not be the thing you break your fast with. My dear listener, Ramadan is your boot camp. Ramadan is your training ground. This is the camp that you're sent to fix yourself, to become a better version of yourself, to become an ideal version of yourself. What you do after this training ground, what you do after this boot camp, will determine how successful the training ground was. Most people crash during or after Eid because they think Ramadan is a one-time challenge. But instead, like we said, it is a training ground. It is a boot camp. How can we keep the discipline that we installed after Ramadan? There are 3 things that we can do. All of them, or some of them, or at least one of them. Number 1, center your schedule around salah, around your prayer. Number 2, daily recitations of Quran, because that one is not something that you can get out of. We entered a period of time, a month that is purely dedicated to Quran, and it's called the month of Quran. Of course, we need to stick to that habit and stay consistent, even if it is a few lines or a few verses. And a third thing you could do is to keep on fasting Mondays and Thursdays, or continue with periodic fasting to better discipline ourselves. And that is the key, my dear listeners, to be consistent. The Prophet ﷺ said that the best actions, or the most beloved actions by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are أدومها وإن قل, the most frequent and consistent, even if it is little. And discipline isn't just about one big effort, it's about consistent small wins. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you for tuning in to the Barakah Blueprint podcast, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us reach and achieve the success of Ramadan. Let's focus on building habits that last beyond the month of Ramadan. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe and to leave a review for this podcast so I know what I am doing that is good, or what I can do to better improve the delivery of this very important message. And share it with people so that they can continue to enjoy and reap the benefits that this podcast has, and so that you can get a share of the ajr and reward. Stay focused, stay purposeful, stay productive in Ramadan style, I was about to say, but in Barakah style. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your actions in this Ramadan. Assalamu alaikum.